Today we are going to discuss about exception handling in Java. So we'll discuss various aspects of how we can actually catch the exception using try catch. Also we'll discuss the hierarchy. So let's begin this video. So in this video we are going to explain how you can handle the exception. Now what is exception? Exception is generally nothing an unwanted event that interrupts the normal flow of the program. Now when exception occurs, it is not handled. So the program terminates over there. Now, if you see over here, I'm trying to give you an example of a class where I'm trying to create a string and then I'm trying to convert that to a number. But here, this is going to be a problematic because you are trying to convert a string to an integer, which is not a correct way. And ultimately, when you run this particular program, you get a number format exception over here. Now this is how the inexperienced developer drew and write the code over here. So they doesn't have the particular error handling mechanism properly handled in the code. So in this particular way, you get an exception over here. Now the proper way to handle the exception is try having the try catch implementation. Now we'll also look at how we can actually implement the try catch. Now if you see, I've written one try and the catch, and then I'm trying to catch that exception then that is being thrown over here. Now if you see, when you have this particular exception thrown, the code which you want to have that particular code to be handled up, I'm trying to write in the code try block, and the one which is going to exception handle that, I'm trying to write in this particular code over here. Now this is how your program will run. Now if there is some exception under the try block, you just the catch block will write and run over there. Now once I write this particular program, you will able to see once I run this that you know how the flow is working over here. So here if you see, I'm trying to run it now. Now you see the program, it has got run, it has got the try block, it has got the exception, and then if you see, it is printing that particular program is not an appropriate which I am written. It's a wrong approach. So this is how it works. Now let me try to run it in the debug mode just to show you how the flow would work in. Now if you see here, it is going to call in the number of pants over there, and then if you see, it is trying to parse it, and then the exception has been happened over here. Now here if you see, the exception happened over here and it is exception. So this is how the developer writes the code in a proper way, and this is how you should be writing your code. So now if you see, I'm trying to rerun this to show you like how the flow is there. Now if you debug and see, you will see there is a number format exception. Once I come to the next thing, now you will see it is going to run it again. See here. Now if you see here, the method now on the line number 12, if you see, there is a number format exception which is being thrown. It is caught over there, and you see there is a text trace for it. So if you see, it is going to throw an exception over here. See here. Now if the one which the program actually I've sorted it now you will see there is no exception being thrown over here. The code flow work from system, then it goes to the next line, and then it prints up. So there is no exception been happening, and then it finishes the code over there. So this is how you write a normal with no exception being thrown. So in this way, you can catch any exception which been thrown in this particular try catch block. So any suspicious code you are trying to write here, you will be able to handle it over here. Now if you want to handle any kind of exception over here, so if you see, there is an exception class. So this is called the Pokemon exception handling technique, where you can handle all the exception. Now object being the parent hierarchy, at the top of that, then comes the throwable class, which is in subclass of an object. Then comes the exception, which is subclass of throwable, and then throwable has got the exceptions and error as in differentiation. So that's where we can actually run this and differentiate it. Now you see, I'm trying to print that, and it is going to print that over here. See here. So if you see the object hierarchy, the throwable and other things which I mentioned. So if you see, exception is an subclass of throwable. Now if you look at, see, I'm trying to showcase you where exactly this particular throwable is being referenced, but ideally this is internally been referred by the object class is being throwing, right? So that is the second level hierarchy. Now here I'm talking about the exception propagation. Now let's say you have exception that is occurring, and you doesn't know, like how it exactly to caught that particular exception. So if your code is not properly being handling, then your calling method is going to handle that if there is no exception written over here. Now this particular code is going to throw an arithmetic exception over here. Now if you see, it is dividing by 0, it is going to go propagate to the next previous level on the a method which is going to be called up, and then again if you see, again this is being called up if there is not been handled in that as well. Ultimately to go to the main class, if that particular trisection is handling that, it is going to handle it, or else it will terminate the program. So if you see, when you try to run this, you will be able to see that right from the inside the method till a till b and till c, and then ultimately it has got the exception over there, and it has caught that. So this is how the propagation in the of an exception works here. So it is going to check whether this particular code has caught that exception or not. Now let's discuss about multiple catch blocks. Now let's say you are trying to create a variable which is going to be a null pointer, a null you are trying to create, and then you are trying to create a simple variable which is going to have some character inside it. Now I'm going to write a try block over here to check whether if I'm trying to access that. Let's say I'm trying to access the length of it. Now this data dot value, if I'm trying to call this length over here, then what will happen, as it is a null, it should throw a null pointer exception over here. Now I'm trying to handle this particular null pointer exception or a number format exception. First I'm trying to write the number format exception, then I'm going to write the pointer exception over here to handle the null pointer as well, because this is going to throw a null pointer exception. Now if you look at this, I'm trying to write a catch block with the null pointer exception. Now if you see, I'm going to write the another catch block over here which is going to handle the null pointer exception. Now this is way how you write the multiple catch blocks, so that you can let's say you have doubt of, like this particular exception might be thrown up, or you can run into this particular exception, then you can write this particular code to handle your code flow, so that it doesn't terminates unoccurringly that way. So in this way you can handle your flow, even if unmistakenly there is an exception, it will handle it. Now you see, ultimately at the end, from the most specific to the most general, I've added now exception being the hierarchy top in that, and these are all null pointer and other things are the subclasses of it. So according to the hierarchy of the exception, it is you should first handle the specific first, and then the most general one. Now you see, this is going to handle the null pointer exception over here, and it's going to print that. So this is how you can handle the propagations and the exceptions in this particular multiple catch block. Now let's say if I'm trying to run a proper code over here, let's see how it goes to run it. Now if you see, it is going to properly run it, there is going to be no problem in it, and ultimately it is going to run it. So I have not written any statement inside the try block, hence it is not printing anything over here, but as it is properly being run, there is no exception being run and caught up over here. Now let's discuss about how we can catch the multiple exception. So that now there is a multi-catch statement which has been introduced as a part of Java 7. Now here instead of writing the multiple catch blocks, you can write the multiple exception in a single catch block to handle that. So using the or operator. So instead of writing the duplicate code, you can handle this in the same proper format over here. Now this is how you write this. Now let's me try to run this and see, like again the exception being caught up. Now you see, it is caught over here, even though if I have handled that particular catch exception inside one single catch block. Now let's discuss about the finary block. This is going to a code which will contain always the code will be executed over here. Now under this, if you see, after the try catch block, you will have a one finally section to be introduced over here. Now you will be able to see that there is a finally block over here. Now if you see, this particular code will always be executed. So this is normally used to clean up those the activities. Let's say you have done some resource, you have done your code and you try to clear up the resources. In that case, you try to execute it. Now there are some couple of scenarios where you this particular finally block is not executed, but we'll discuss that. But if you see, no matter what happens, the finally block will be always be executed. Now let's say if I'm trying to run this now again, now you see the null pointer also exception has happened. Even though after the exception has been caught, now finally block has also been executed over there. So that's how it runs it. Now let's look at how we can actually works with the return statements over here. Now when you're writing the return statement, you have to be very careful and you're trying to deal with try catch and the finally, because return works little bit different over here. Now you see that in the finally block we have this particular code return, but ultimately if you see it is written in the file, because it doesn't work like when it is returning, then it is not going to return from there if you have a finally block. Yeah, if it would have been a different case, only the catch block was there, but here you will see that there is already a finally block. Now let's say if I'm commenting it, now you see it is going to return that particular 3 over here, okay, because there is no exception being caught over here. Now let's say if I'm trying to throw some exception over here, I'm trying to access something and some exception being thrown over here. Now let's see how the flow works in that case. Now see, I have uncommented the finally block. Now you see, you will be able to see that particular code and executing. You'll see the 5 is executed over here in spite of there being exception being run. It has been caught up in the exception, and then it is ultimately the finally is going to return as a final value over there. So this is how, in spite of this, it is going to run. Now let's say you wanted to doesn't want that particular finally block to be executed. How you can do that? There is one scenario where you can do that by using the system.out.system.exit. There is a method which you will be able to write that. So in this case, your code flow will stop completely, terminate over here. It will not go beyond this particular line 12 over here. Now you see this is going to end over here, and there is no finally block being executed over here. Now let's say if I'm not throwing any exception over here, let's say there is no in the try block only I try to write the system. Now you'll see there is no catch block being executed, the finally block being executed over there. So this is how you can deal with scenarios in this case of that one. Now ultimately with Java 7 there was an introduction of try with resources, where you can handle multiple you can auto close those particular resources without being manually writing those things. So this is one of the best way to write that. Now from you can actually the crucial feature is that the resource management is automatically going to close the resources, whether you are dealing with files, database, etc. So it is going to implement an auto closable. So it is a much a cleaner way